Happy Thursday. I am so excited to be jumping on here live with you tonight. Feel like I haven't seen everybody live for a while, so I'm so excited about jumping on here with you live tonight. We have some great things we're going to be talking about tonight, so let's just jump in and get started. First of all, I want to say welcome to the educational members only build class that we are working on tonight for our Thursday together. So, for tonight, uh, this is our Thursday build class, and we're going to be focused on lockers tonight. So, we're going to be diving in super specific. Every week, we do one aspect of building your Jeep for our Thursday members only build class. So, for tonight, we're going to be focused in just looking at the locker. So, oops. If you have any questions that come up for you as we are going through this class together tonight live, please drop them in the comments and I will make sure to jump in there and answer those for you. You will get a response to any comments. We'll be checking back on this as well to make sure we didn't miss anything. So, any questions, whether you're watching live or the replay, will be answered for you. So, as we're going through this today, I try to keep our Thursday classes as short as possible. So I'm just going to be going through the information together. So if you have questions come up, again, please drop your questions in the comments and then we will jump over and make sure to answer all of those for you. All questions answered. That is important. So last week for our Thursday members only build class, we focused on aftermarket differential covers, talked about what makes them different, a couple different choices, different kinds, different makes, and went over when, why you should think about adding that aftermarket differential cover. So then the previous week, we dove into gears, understanding when, why, what regearing entails, and what the benefits are when you go ahead and regear your Jeep. So, for tonight, staying focused on the front differential or on your differentials, front and rear, we are going to stay focused on that differential area so that we're going to be jumping in and dive into lockers. I have a lot of questions come up about this. So, I'm excited to break through some of those questions with you live tonight. So, biggest question, what does a locker really do? So let's jump in and talk about that for a minute. But first, what we need to talk about is a misconception about four-wheel drive. So, what does four-wheel drive really mean when you put your Jeep in four-wheel drive? So, this is a great picture. This is a Jeep drivetrain. So, you can actually see where your drive shafts are that are coming out of your transfer case and running to the actual differential, so to the front axle or the rear axle of your Jeep. So this is a great drivetrain picture I wanted to share with you to really illustrate this. So let's talk about two-wheel drive. When we are in two-wheel drive, we are getting power sent to one axle, one drive shaft, right? So if you're in two-wheel drive, you push on the gas, you are only getting power to the rear wheels of your vehicle. So basically, when you put it in drive, in two-wheel drive, you're sending power to the rear end only. So your tires are gaining traction, they're spinning, they're moving, and that is what is driving your Jeep. So when we put it in four-wheel drive, so as you can see in this diagram, it is a great photo. It is an actual Jeep drivetrain, so you can see it. When we start talking about putting our Jeep in four-wheel drive, so you can see where that big chunk is kind of what it looks like in this diagram in the center of your Jeep is. So that is your transfer case. And you can see that there's a drive shaft that is going from the rear to the rear axle that goes to your differential. And then you can see there's a drive shaft that's coming off the front that runs that front differential and that front axle. So when you put your Jeep in four-wheel drive, you are activating that transfer case that has gears inside of it as well, but you activate that transfer case, which means it's going to transfer power. So instead of only sending power to the rear wheels of your Jeep when you hit the gas, it is now transferring and sending power to the rear and the front at the same time. So what that means is when you hit the gas, there's power being sent to the rear of your vehicle, so your tires are turning, and the front of your vehicle, so your tires are turning. A misconception, though, is that all four tires are going to turn the same when you're in four-wheel drive. That's not the case. What is happening is you're getting power sent there. So, yes, all tires are getting power and are going to be turning and rotating and moving. But this is where we start talking about the difference between four-wheel drive and a locker. So, what four-wheel drive is, again, quick in a nutshell. When you go from two-wheel drive to four-wheel drive, you engage that transfer case right there in the center of that drivetrain. Now, when you hit the gas, you are sending power. So the rear wheels are getting power and the front wheels are getting power. That is why it's four-wheel drive. What that does not mean, though, is all four tires are going to be spinning together at the same time, same rotation, same mass. That is the locker. So now that you understand four-wheel drive, it just means you're getting power to the front and the rear of the vehicle at the same time. Let's talk about how the locker works, what it really means, what it does. So again, we're looking at our drivetrain picture. So when you put it in four-wheel drive, you now have power going, right, to the rear and the front of the vehicle. And you do get more traction based on what transfer case you have and the gear reduction in that transfer case. So that big transfer case in the center that you see there, if you have a Rubicon, you have a 4-to-1 transfer case. It changes how it transfers that power to those tires and how they spin. So you are getting more traction in 4-low. You only get that full reduction, gear reduction of the transfer case in 4-low. So think about that. You get your most traction, most bite, most crawl in 4-low. Now, if you have lockers, when you turn that locker button on, let's talk about this. So we're going to talk about the front end for a minute. Now you're in 4-low. There's power that is being sent to the front end of the vehicle and the rear end at the same time. You're driving, your tires are getting power, but let's say you get into a situation where you're trying to crawl up a ledge or up a rock surface and you're having a hard time. Your Jeep's not just crawling up it and you're in 4-low. When you hit your locker button, so let's say we're going to hit our front locker button, and you have a front locker. What that means is that locks that front end. So that technically, when you hit the gas, now that you are locked, both front tires are going to spin the same speed, the same rotation, no matter what. Doesn't matter if you're up against a ledge and both tires are pinned up there and they're spinning, trying to get traction. One isn't going to spin if one loses traction or one gets traction. Basically, both of those tires, doesn't matter if one's up in the air, they're going to spin at the same speed and same rotation as long as you are on the gas. So when you engage a locker, it literally locks the front end or locks the rear end so that both tires are going to spin together, regardless of traction, regardless if one is on the ground or not, regardless of anything. Those tires are going to keep spinning together at the same rotation. So that is what the locker does. It enables you, for example, if you are in a position where you are trying to mount and to crawl something and you're noticing you're having a hard time because maybe you have a tire that's going dead so that the traction is being switched from one tire to another, or you get to a point where you have one tire up in the air and you're trying to get all this traction to the tire that's on the ground. When you engage that locker and both of those tires are spinning at the same speed, same rotation, what happens is you can actually, and I'm not saying you're not going to break, but you can actually pin that up against, like if you're trying to get up a ledge or up and over a rock, and they're just going to keep spinning. even if there's pressure, even if they're not going anywhere until they get traction. Or again, you start up and one tire starts to come off the ground, this other tire keeps going to help bring you to level you back out. So that is what the locker does. In essence, it's called the locker because it's locking that axle so that it's now locked. Both tires are going to move together, spin together. You're not going to have one tire that's going to spin faster than the other, one that's going to stop spinning, anything like that. They are now connected. So that is what the locker itself does. And I know I get lots of questions about that. Like, what's the difference between four-wheel drive and the locker? Well, I thought when you put it in four-wheel drive, all four tires were spinning. They are, but there's a difference between the locker that engages and locks that front end so that they're spinning together at the same speed. So, another question, which locker is right for you? If you did not buy a Rubicon, so you bought a Jeep that does not have a locker in it, let's talk about what locker is going to be right for you. There are a lot of different options out there. There are gear lockers. They call them spider lockers. There are selectable lockers. There's all sorts of different options out there for you. So we are going to be focusing on that your Jeep is your daily driver. So if your Jeep is your daily driver, you really want to get a selectable locker. What does that mean? That means you can turn your locker on and off. A gear locker it's based on pressure, but if you're in two-wheel drive and you have a gear locker, let's say in the rear end of your Jeep, it's your daily driver. When you go to make hard turns, like say into a parking spot or anything, the rear end will kind of chirp and bounce like boop, 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 because that locker is still engaging and unengaging because it's a gear locker. So when you have a selectable locker, there's a couple things. If you have a selectable locker, you can get a selectable locker so that you can lock the front only or the rear only. So you can select which axle you want locked and you can turn it on and turn it off. So when we're talking about a daily driver, you want a selectable locker that you can turn on and then turn off so that you are not locked all the time in four-wheel drive and you're not having that gear locker that can catch while you're in two-wheel drive on your daily driver. So I highly recommend if you have a daily driver and you want to get a locker, get a selectable locker. Now, when we're talking about selectable lockers, there are two different options I want to talk to you about. There's an e-locker, which is the electronic locker, which is what you get factory stock on a Rubicon. What that means is it is an electronic button that you hit and it has a box. It's an electronic trigger that will lock and unlock your lockers. And then your other option is an air locker. When you look into an air locker, like ARB makes an air locker, it is air that forces that axle to lock and then unlock. If you look at an air locker, you will have to get an air compressor and it has to be run to that air locker because the air, when you hit your button, you'll have two buttons if you get an air locker. One to turn your air compressor on, has to build pressure. Then you hit your locker button. What happens then is the air is then forced into and locks your locker. So it's all done with air versus a sensor and a switch that is electronic for your e-locker. Basically, there are two different options of a selectable locker that allows you to lock and then unlock your locker. And it also a selectable locker will allow you to be able to select which axle you want to lock. So this is important when you start thinking about looking at locker, getting a locker. You want to really think about long term, like daily driver. You want it to keep its road manners. You want to be able to go on trips. You want to enjoy it. That selectable locker is going to be your best choice. So that's something to think about as you start thinking about lockers. So then that kind of leads into the next question is, when do you need to even think about getting a locker, right? Because the Jeeps are so capable on their own. Factory, there are so many things you can do with them. So many places that you can go. So if you don't have a locker, when would you get to that point that you need to add a locker or think about adding a locker? My advice is when the trails start to get harder. So when you start moving up, like so say you've been doing beginner, easy trails, when you start moving up to harder trails, that is when you want to think about adding a locker because the trails are getting harder, the obstacles are getting harder. So they're going to be harder on your vehicle and they're going to be harder for you to navigate and for your Jeep to be able to drive. So as you start to move up to harder levels, the trails get tougher, the obstacles get bigger and harder. That is when you want to think about looking into adding a locker. Then the next question would be why would you want to add a locker? I know people that have open vehicles that have never had a locker, and there's nothing wrong with that. So why would you want to add a locker? When you add that locker, what that does is that gives you the ability to slow down and to try to crawl an obstacle based on traction versus needing more speed or momentum to be able to make that obstacle. Perfect example. We were just talking about, you know, if you're trying to mount a rock ledge. So in this picture, you can see that there's our different size rocks with different kind of ledges in this picture. So if you were going to drive that in a vehicle with a locker, if you turned your lockers on, you would try to crawl as much as you can, as slow as you can, have as much control as possible. And you should be able to get up and mount and mount. And that locker is going to help the ability for the vehicle to be able to go slower. If you were open, and maybe you can't get enough traction to get up over that lip, you would have to use momentum to kind of help to bounce or propel you to get up and over that, which means you'll have to have a little more speed. When we start talking about momentum, momentum will add a little bit of speed. It's going to add a little more concussion and a little more bounce, which then means you're being a little bit harder on those mechanical parts and pieces of your vehicle. Because anytime you have to hit something a little bit harder, you have a little more bounce to it. You're at a higher risk for wear and tear on parts and pieces, damage or breaking anything because momentum, think science, right? If you have momentum, it means you're going to have more impact, which means then there's a higher probability to be doing either short term or long term damage to mechanical parts and pieces of your Jeep. So that's why you would want to add a locker. It is just going to give you that extra so that you can try to hit things slower, have more control, have more traction, be able to mount things. That is where that locker comes into play. When you start talking about advanced trails that are really hard, you absolutely are going to want a locker because sometimes that makes the difference in the traction and the wheel speed and being able to make an obstacle if you have that ability and that control to have that axle locked and both tires spinning at the same time. So as the trails get really hard, the locker is an absolute necessity. So hopefully that has helped you a little bit to understand how four-wheel drive works, has helped you to understand what the locker does, how it performs, what locker you would need, when you would start thinking about it, and why you would want it. So today we focused in specifically staying in that differential in our Jeep and talking about the locker. So I know we've spent 3 weeks now specifically talking about differential and front end. So differential covers, re-gearing, and now the locker. But don't worry, we have more to come in our Thursday build classes. Don't forget, every Thursday for our members only, we do our build classes. We pick one specific aspect, like we did today, the locker, to focus in on, to do a quick but in-depth rundown on that one specific area, piece, or information for your build for your Jeep. So you might be asking, what if I'm not a ladyjeepers.com educational member? If you are interested in more information on how you can become a Lady Jeepers educational member, go ahead and just drop "I want more" in the comments, and I will go ahead and personally reach out to you, share with you. We have a brand new educational membership program that is on its way to you. So I will get you all the information if you want to make sure to be able to jump in on these Thursday build classes, plus so much more as an amazing ladyjeepers.com educational member. So just let me know. Don't forget, just drop I want more below, and I will personally reach out to you and get you the information that's going to be right for you on your Jeep journey to build your education, your knowledge, your understanding, so that you can safely get out there and live adventures, all while keeping you and your Jeep safe. So thank you for jumping on here for tonight. I love these classes. So don't forget, ladies, our next class will be next Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Every Thursday for our fall session. For our members, we are doing our Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern, specifically focused on aspects for your Jeep build. So thank you so much, ladies. I will jump down to any questions or anything that came in for our comments. I love seeing all of you on here live with me. So excited. Thank you for spending this Thursday evening with me as we talked lockers and dove into understanding the locker a little more in depth. I appreciate it. I love seeing all of you on here. Oh my gosh, ladies, you're awesome. So I will jump down to check comments. Don't worry, I will get back to all of you. And if you have any questions, just let me know. That is what we are here for. So thank you. I will see you again soon. Bye, everybody.